Hello, welcome to the Doomer Optimism podcast. I'm Nate, and I'm here today with Austin Frerick. Austin is the author of the book Barons, which is, I will say, just a tour de force book on corruption in the food industry, basically. And I've been doing a lot of work in my own life the last year or two to not allow myself to become angry with current events, things that I don't control very much. This book has not been helpful for me on that front. It really exposes a lot of things that are really quite enraging, but I think are really important. And so, Austin, I wonder if you would just briefly introduce yourself and we can kind of dive into the stuff of the book and the food system generally.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Nate. I mean, I should say part of the reason why I wrote this book was, to me, you have to understand how we got to this point in order to fix the system. So even though it can be angering, is you got to know what went wrong in order to get to the promised land. That said, I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, Eastern Iowa, 7th generation Iowan. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I went to Grinnell, Wisconsin, and this book is my attempt at wrestling with what happened to Iowa in my lifetime. Iowa should be the Italy of North America, but it's everything but. It's an extraction colony. It's like West Virginia in the 19th century. The land's producing the most it's ever produced, and none of that money's staying there. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in America, has a water quality crisis. There's like 60 to 70% of the waterways are too polluted for people to go into. So, and even something simple as what I noticed the most was growing up, you would see animals in the land, and now you don't.
Mhm.
You smell them, but you don't see them. So I really want to figure out what happened here.
Yeah, that's a great starting place, and that was actually going to be my first question that you really pretty much addressed, which was simply we're both Midwesterners. I grew up in Southern Illinois, um, and you kind of answered it, but I kind of like I think this is a really important picture to paint because I wanted to talk a little bit about just like just in our lifetimes, right? Like I was born in 1977, and even if you just extend back 10 years from that, I mean the Midwest has changed in very profound ways,
Yeah.
like really, really profound ways. And I think that's important to take into account. The way things are right now is extraordinarily different than the way that things were 50 years ago. And so, why don't we start, I guess, talking a little bit about that just from what you can see with your eyes and experience as a person on the land, and then move into kind of like, well, how did this happen?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of come from the place that the system we have now is radical. It is radical that one man does 5 million hogs in Iowa. Things just went off the rails. They really did. I mean, it's a story of regulatory capture. We're living in another gilded age where a few are benefiting at the expense of the many. But I mean, what this means for people, and it took me a while to realize this, but is the loss of taste. Is
Mm,
this system doesn't make good tasting food, especially meat and dairy. Inputs matter. A cow in pasture eating a different diet of grasses is going to make a much better tasting breast milk than some cow in a metal shed in New Mexico.
mhm.
And you just see so many corners being cut. Driscoll's is my berry baron in the book. They grow berries in every continent in the world except Antarctica, and so sometimes it's Morocco, sometimes it's Argentina. But that berry's not engineered for taste; it's engineered for durability. And so it's funny. Like I realized that talking to older Iowans it's something I kept hearing from people. It's just the system is not making good tasting food. And I should say I noticed at my wedding too. My mom's like stereotypically Irish Catholic. She's one of 12. So and I'm one of the youngest cousins. So like 40 some cousins. So when you have a wedding, you have to invite everyone because you don't want to like families that big are like almost cliques within themselves.
Mhm.
But my big thing at our wedding was I wanted pasture meat. And the amount of Iowans in my family that said how good our pork was just incredible. Because like they're used to this industrial, not good tasting pork.
I had that experience recently. Myself, when we're about 6 or 7 years into our pastured regenerative beef operation that we're working on building, and so there's been a huge learning curve, and we're dialing that in. But since then, of course, I mean, we fill our freezers every year, and so that's basically all the beef I eat. And it's different, and you kind of adapt, and you get to where, well, that's what beef tastes like. And the other day, Emily and the kids were out of town, and I didn't have anything thought out, and I was on my way home from work, and I kind of had the thought of like, well, maybe I'll try a steak from the grocery store.
Yeah.
And it's thought it'll be easy to make, and I'll cook it, and I'll see. And I was a little afraid that I was gonna like the corn fed taste and whatnot. And I bought it, and I brought it home, and I cooked it, and I cooked it well, not well done, but like I'm pretty good at cooking steak, so it was a nicely prepared steak, and I ate it. Now it was just the most flavorless, limp thing. I couldn't believe it, and it was really neat to me to be like, hey, maybe we are doing something right here, because this is extraordinarily different and just like bad. Um, and it's one of those things, because, like I said, I've eaten only the grass fed stuff that we've done, and so just to have that juxtaposition just really stark for me was pretty cool, actually.
It was. And like, I mean, that's why when I wrote this book, I did a lot of tastings. I did a lot of milk tastings, actually. I had people try industrial milk, pasture milk, and then my Dairy Barons Fairlife. It's like a hyper processed milk. And, industrial milk always ranks last because it's just not good. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind here, and what's concerning to me is, given that a lot of most people are eating this low quality product, it's turning people away from them. I mean, I wrote off melons most of my life because they're tasteless, cantaloupe. And then once you have a good melon, you're like, oh, there's so much more here. I mean, I was walking around a Hy-Vee in Des Moines, Iowa last month. I like to go to grocery stores. It's my thing. And there's a new Hy-Vee prototype that opened, and I was like, this is Iowa in July, and the produce section here is garbage. None of it's from Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
The tomatoes are from like some hot house and like wherever, and it's just, to me, a tomato in July is one of the best things in the summer in the Midwest, and
Mm-hmm.
I just can't get that here.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and like you said, and I mean, we could talk forever. Just I like the way you said it. They're not. It's not selecting for flavor. It's not selecting for health, nutritional value. It's selected for sort of these industrial conveniences. Ability to ship for a long way, to kind of hold its form, to look really pretty. So it's selected for these variables, and then you can go that. I mean, through anything. Again, we have cattle, and our eldest son has been into showing cattle, and you go into showing, and you look around, and you see the animals that are. It's actually changing a little bit in the beef industry, but especially like 10 years ago, even the animals they were selecting for were these gigantic animals that are great for a feedlot. But
Hmm.
not very. They're not the kind of animals I'd ever want in my herd, which would be shorter and smaller and more efficient on grass. Performance for grass. So it's just interesting how our food system, the genetics of our food system, are being shaped around industrial processes generally, rather than what the land needs, what people need, and what the organisms themselves need.
That, and like, just to add on to that, and I realized this with Walmart. So Walmart's my grocery baron in my book, and to be honest with you, I didn't plan to write about Walmart because I didn't really think of them as a grocery store. But once you start looking at it, they sell 1 in 3 groceries in America. I mean, their market share is insane. I mean, their market share is the same as the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth combined. I mean, they are the king of kings. Like, if I had a table of barons, they'd be the head one. And I say this because I just remember some of the grocery industry told me, big boys like to run with big boys. The creation of one robber baron makes other robber barons because they're trying to, like, you want to have some power, some leverage when you negotiate with Walmart. But the thing with Walmart is they don't want one beef supplier or one berry supplier for each store. They want someone that can do a massive amount of volume, that can always have a red berry year round. And so it pushes this system. So then people doing it right, doing it local, keeping your money local, you're kind of pushed out of that system, and it bifurcates the system. That's what I've noticed. I mean, underappreciated thing here too is, like, part of what's going on there is that's why Walmart much rather deal with a rancher who's doing Amazon rainforest beef, cough
Mm-hmm.
cough JBS, than someone doing ranching 5 miles down from their store.
Yeah, it's not consistent. It's not, it doesn't have nearly the supply they need. There's just a bunch of reasons. There's a lot more work too. I mean, I imagine trying to buy from a lot of smaller producers, as opposed to a giant contract where they can just sort of, yeah, you give us this at this price at this volume, and we're not going to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's they want the predictability, But to keep in mind is that actually makes a really fragile system. I mean, you're seeing it with all these like different bird flus go over where you want diversity because diversity is resilience in your herd.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have so many genetically similar animals, you're just asking for trouble. I mean, to me, the scariest thing right now is actually what China's doing in pork production. I mean, they're building these 10-story confinements.
Oh, I saw those.
First of all, to your listeners, Google the images. They're just effing incredible and scary as hell because they're putting them around their cities. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, you're just asking for another COVID. I mean, we know the last one was, I mean, let's not even go down that road. Sorry. It's just really
bad.
fucking, it's bad.
It's
like
bad.
they even know it's bad, but they lock their workers inside these CAFOs because they're afraid of the workers bringing the disease out. So like you almost like go in there for stints at a time.
Oh.
But it's just like, I mean, just imagine the manure of a 10-story hog confinement. I mean, a hog defecates 3 times more than a human, and you stuff them all into that.
That's what people don't get, I think, sometimes about these. Like, you have to imagine, like, a confinement operation is like a city as far as its waste. It's like a city, a whole city's worth of waste that's just, I mean, it's just released. I mean, they do some, I mean, they try to manage it a little bit, but, you know, like you've mentioned in the book, and like what happens often is you have a flood and that whole system, it just flows into the waterways. And you can really debate whether how effective their system of treatment is to begin with. You know, they're definitely not held to the same standards of like a human city where, you know, waste has to be processed to a certain standard. The hog produces a similar volume and type of waste and isn't held to that standard at all.
I mean, to me, that's the best illustration of that is in dairy. My dairy baron, their operation is about an hour south of Gary, Indiana. It's part of 35,000 cows. And like those 35,000 cows produce as much manure in a day as the city of Boston, Texas. And this, which is just wild. And on top of it, and I didn't know this until I started researching it, this is a former wetland. Like this was known as the Everglades of the North. Like Teddy Roosevelt used to go hunting here. Like I only realized it when I was driving around because they bought 20,000 acres at once, which is nearly impossible to do in the Midwest. And they were only able to do it because this area was supposed to be the third airport for the Chicago metro.
Mm.
So they bought it, and I saw canals everywhere around their cornfields. And they're like, I've seen a lot of cornfields in my lifetime. I've never seen canals around cornfield. So I was like, what's going on here? And I realized, oh, that's what's going on here. This isn't a wetland that's been drained. So not only, you probably shouldn't even be farming this, to be honest with you, but to do on top of it, to do industrial dairy cows, which are just so manure producing, it's just wild. On top of it, they said they sold this whole narrative of being sustainable when they're everything but. And the other, to your point earlier about like wastewater treatment kind of stuff, the second you regulate hog manure or industrial cow manure as a human manure, this model is no longer economically viable. You know what I mean? That should have its own wastewater treatment plant. So like so much of the undercurrent of this book is it's just people cutting corners. It's regulatory capture, and it's passing, instead of internalizing the cost, they're passing it on to people at our expense.
And this is, you know, to kind of go back to the, you know, because I want to tie this at every turn to sort of like the you know, the human cost of this. It's, you know, the Midwest is, well, like you've called it, Iowa's an extraction colony, and you can extend that, you know, throughout the I states and just the grain belt as a whole. You know, you have the giant Everglades of the North, a giant wetland. You have, you know, prairie. You have, you know, we've just taken all of that ecological bounty and, you know, made it into the waterways aren't clean. You know, like you mentioned, you can't swim in a lot of these places. Um, Biodiversity is a fraction of what it used to be. Um, it's just such a different, and people don't live here anymore either. You know, like people don't live. I mean, the population of humans has crashed substantially because there's not money to support people because there's no way to make a good living in the deeper rural areas at this point.
Yeah, I mean, that is, to me, writing the Hog Chapter, you see it best, is just how profoundly sad this makes me.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just, the first draft of that, I was angry.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's just sad because part of it is, more than anything, is what it could be.
Yeah.
A lot of these small towns actually have really good cores to them. Like I used to live in Winterset, Iowa, which is like people know it for Bridges in Madison County, that movie. Beautiful town. I was living in an apartment in an old bank. I could walk down to the farmer's market in the morning. I could walk to a theater on the town square. I could get lunch at this drugstore. These towns have beautiful brick cores, but they're not thriving. I mean, the thing is, no one's articulating a positive vision for them. The unsaid thing is move to where your kids are in Des Moines, And my big hope here is, more than anything, is we need to put animals back on the land. And I actually think this moment's coming soon. I mean, ethanol is dying. Cars are moving to hybrids and EVs. And so the question is, what are we going to do with that corn land, all that land in corn production when that moment comes? To me, here's the thing. Most grains will be robotic soon, and that's not a bad thing. Like, you go to a farm show now, I mean, these tractors basically drive themselves. But like, there's only so many cows or cattle on land that one person can look after. And like, that's my hope here it's cruel, it's bad for the environment, it's bad tasting. Insert word, this industrial thing. It's just run its course.
Animals back on the land. I love that. I love it. And agree completely.
Rural communities were healthy when we had middle-class farms. And like, that's what we need to get back to, because middle-class farms, they pay taxes, they send their kids to local schools. And what happened is, when they disappeared, we saw the middle class in rural communities disappear. And it's even something simple as, this is a weird thing to compare it to, I think of a family farm like a retirement portfolio. You want to have multiple crops going on in case one crashes. Mm-hmm. And I feel like now the system pushes everyone to do one or two things. And that just makes you so fragile. It's like putting all your retirement money in one stock, which is just, everyone tells you not to do. But we're doing that.
Yeah, and you look at corn and bean prices right now, and we're going to have a bumper crop this year. It's going to be unbelievable because it's just the moisture we've had. It's been basically the best growing season I can remember. It's unbelievable. Harvests are going to be crazy, which is good because, man, there's not going to be, the prices are awful. And I know it's putting the hurt on some people. Yeah, it's.
Wait, won't that make it? I mean, my fear is it's going to make it worse. I mean, you have low prices already, and this will just make prices drop even more.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's going to be better because of that. Yeah, it's not a good development, but going back to the animals on the land, which is just a vision I'm completely behind. My sort of vision, for our farm and a healthy Midwest agriculture is basically a completely perennial, mostly perennial, like perennial. Being the backbone of it. So yeah, there's room for grain and especially if you rotate grain with pasture over time, but animals are a part of a perennial system, because you won't find a healthy ecosystem on planet Earth that doesn't have animals on it, and especially if you're talking about grass, you just need ruminant animals. It's not like grass and ruminant animals go together. They really have to be, a healthy, balanced ecosystem. And so that sort of idea of animals back on the land, it's good for communities. It requires a certain, and people, I think a lot is like, view farming as drudgery, and it's pretty nice.
Yeah, I was going to say, I the funniest thing people tell me is, well, people don't want to do this. I was like, no, I disagree with that so much. Of like, so many people rather not work in a cubicle. They'd rather just be their own boss, like use their hands. Yeah. Like, I noticed that the most, actually, there's two types of farmers I've noticed that really fascinate me. Dairy farmers tend to have the most intimate relationships with their animals. They're almost like each cow is like a dog to them. They know the personality because of the milking, being so close to them. And then cattle is like the most, I notice with cattle ranchers, they tend to be the most big picture, because they're managing like the way it's like almost like talking to a fisherman in Louisiana. They just know the rhythm of life. They know the rhythm of the land, and they just kind of know how to move them between different pastures. I don't know. I think that's been underappreciated. And like, a lot of people, they want to do that. They want to like be their own boss, like be able to like, oh, I think I should do this today, instead of just being told. I mean, the scary thing to me in the food system is Walmart's entering the beef and dairy business. And do we want low wage workers for Walmart, or do we want people being their own boss, making good food?
It's unbelievable. It's like the biggest, to use a trendy term these days. It's the biggest psyop I can think of. Like we imagine, somehow we've been sold this idea that, it's better for people. It's better to, work at Walmart or work in a cubicle or whatever than to, pay attention to 200 acres and and move cattle or tend hogs or whatever, which I mean, I will say is nice. I mean, I can say this because I do it, and I do both, right? And I kind of like my office job actually, so I don't want to, but it's a good blend. And the work when you can be out and paying attention, it's a good life. It's a good way to live, and it's just such an insane lie to think that what's important is that we consolidate everything and that we have a few farmers farming 3 to 5 to 10,000 acres, and we get people off the land and we destroy communities and we ship all of this kind of empty calories into the cities where they can support people sitting in cubicles or working at fast food or whatever. It's like we're not thinking about quality of life when we're doing it that way.
Yeah.
We're just not.
Then, I try to make this point in my Coffee Baron chapter. My Coffee Baron chapter is about the history of monopoly in America. And I talked a lot about my mom's coffee shop in Iowa, where here's the thing. There's no coffee native to Iowa. You can get coffee anywhere. People came to my mom's store because she built a relationship with them. You know what I mean? It was a sense of community. I mean, I think that's been lost because she had so much pride in her business. Local places, local owners, they make a place. And they also maintain traditions, and I think that's underappreciated. Is like so much food in America is homogenized, and it's like homogenized meh. Where, I mean, for example, I'm part Czech, so like a big thing in Cedar Rapids are kolaches. They're like these little sweet pastries, and so at my wedding we did kolaches, and I can't go to Walmart and buy 500 kolaches, but I can go to a local baker and they will bake me 500 kolaches, and like it's these little things like that I don't know. They just add meaning to life that I just don't. This cult of efficiency is really stripped of stuff.
Cult of efficiency. That's amazing. I had a conversation too that I was kind of listening to in prep for this interview with a friend of yours. He said to say hi, Greg Gunthorpe. He's been on the podcast
I
before.
literally was emailing Greg this morning. Greg is one of my favorite people, and like there's certain people that kind of push you down certain roads. Greg was one of them.
Yeah,
I'll
he's
never
great.
forget. I met Greg in Kansas, and he did the food for this event we were at, and the chicken wings were like the biggest chicken wings I've ever seen in my life. And I just was like looking at them, and it turns out they were his chicken wings. We just talked for like a while, and like he told me like chickens used to have big wings. We just bred it out of them. Like it's such a we order his turkeys all the time for Thanksgiving. Sorry, I didn't even go on that ramble, but you meet people
Absolutely.
like Greg,
It's good.
and you're like, how do we make more of them? We don't need to make him bro. We need to copy and paste him. Because that's the system I want to live in. Is his food is just so good. His turkey is so good. It's just like, who isn't happy after a good meal? And like that's what you want. Is like you look. I want to live in that America where people like that thrive.
Absolutely, and that's a really good and important point. I think is we don't need Greg to grow and get bigger. We need more Gregs. That's exactly right. And I think that we have kind of had this mindset forever of like, oh, that works, so let's just make that thing huge. But then it becomes something completely terrible. Whereas if we can replicate my kind of in addition to I talk about perennialism and perennial plants being the backbone of an agriculture system, but also I'm less about the small farm. I think there's a place for small farm, but I think the medium scale farm is really where it's at. And that's something that's really been decimated. And you see I think in the last few years, the recovery of small farms with the food movement and things like that, it's been pretty good for small farms, but it's like, there's a lot of challenges to mid-scale farms. And I think that's where, you can start to build a system that can compete, that can start to challenge and actually produce the food at the scale we need. I think you can do that with moderate scale farms. I'm not convinced you can actually do that with really small farms. But the medium scale, I think, seems to be something like a family unit can manage something that size. And I think if it can stay about that size, that can kind of work.
Totally agree. I mean, just what that reminded me of, my favorite definition of a family farm is from the Wisconsin Farmers Union, where they say more than half the labor comes from the family unit.
Yeah.
Because like that's a big thing here too. The undercurrent of my book is, what is a farmer? I mean, my barons will cosplay as farmers, but like my dairy baron, are you really a farmer when you claim residency at the Ritz-Carlton in Puerto Rico? Or is it the undocumented men who do most of the work, the real farmer here?
Yeah.
And so like to me, they're cashing in. They're just asset managers. I mean, they're just cashing in on the hard work imagery of the family farm at their expense. And so even like definition, like I want to focus on that definition because it's, and I know produce is a little different because you need labor for picking season, but that's kind of the definition I go to. That to me is what a farmer is.
Yeah, I love that. And I wanted to not lose the thread here because the reason I brought Greg up is because the conversation that he and I were having on this podcast, you said cult of efficiency, which is a perfect statement, and I'm probably going to use that myself because I talk about this all the time, and I think this idea of efficiency is super problematic when it comes to farming and rural life and just living in general, because efficiency is in a spreadsheet, and efficiency is designed to bring profit to corporations basically. But we want inefficiency. You need overabundance in certain areas. That's how ecologies thrive. That's how economies thrive. That's how people thrive, is when there's extra, when it isn't all gobbled up and taken away. So I think the cult of efficiency in agriculture is incredibly damaging and maybe part of the root of all of this.
I would just add on, it's also lazy.
Say
it's
more.
Like, that is like I'm kind of doing some research on the restaurant industry right now. I'm personally really interested in Cisco. So I'm talking to a lot of restaurant people, and you can try to manage a restaurant chain by looking at Excel all day, but it's just lazy and like you miss so much. I mean, there's so much stuff that can't be quantified. Like going back to my mom's coffee shop, you can't put into Excel the meaning of that relationship, that customer service, what it meant to the people. And also, I mean, even writing this book, I could sit in a room all day and write it. I can look at numbers, but you just learn so much more talking to people. Like there's so much more nuance, loss in numbers. Like even something simple as, like take the dairy. I mean, dairy is its own little beast. There's a dairy guy I talked to. He told me, well, every bankruptcy in dairy occurs on this day because this is when the milk checks come in. You know what I mean? Like there's little nuances like that you just learn from people that live it.
Mm-hmm.
Because all these two have their own little rhythms to it. And Excel, I just think that's the story of this era. And like I can tell when a company's run by Excel. It's I mean, so many chain reps like Perkins is dying. It's owned by private equity. It's Excel mindset, where this is kind of a tangent. I'm fascinated by Texas Roadhouse. It's I believe the second or third highest grossing sit down chain restaurant in America. And that is like, what's really interesting about that is that wasn't created by some Excel. This was a guy who used to run discos in Kentucky. He used to run a Binnigan's. He understood service, and so much of restaurant too is performance, is theater, honestly. So when you walk into a Texas Roadhouse, you see a meat case. You know what I mean? You see them making a bun. It's scratch cooking. It's not healthy, but it's fantastic scratch cooking. And then like, even when you go in there, there's tons of booze because he realized Americans love booze, and they like different eye levels because they like to look around. And you're like, this is a man that lived that industry, knows that industry, spent his life in it. This chain is a result of that. And like someone who just knows Excel doesn't understand that about people, doesn't understand that Americans like booze or like they like eye levels. You know what I mean? It's like these little nuances. And I noticed that in the grocery industry too. Like I love Hy-Vee, and part of it is Hy-Vee's employee owned, and they actually trust their managers to merchandise. My dad used to be beer salesman, so he used to merchandise all the time. So was my grandpa. And like, God, it's so refreshing to like walk into a grocery store and there's, when it's homecoming week, you see a ton of homecoming cakes, things like that. And like, you don't see that at Walmart. Walmart doesn't care.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so true. I talked a little bit ago with Jeffrey Bilbro, and he and I were talking about agrarianism and kind of defining it. And, I think for me, how I was kind of thinking about it and defining it was sort of like, it's I guess if you want to use a kind of a hot button word, at least for me, ideology of relationship, which is kind of an oxymoron of using those two words together. But that's what we're describing here, from everything from how the ecology undergirding a agricultural system functions, to the economics of it, to the restaurant or the grocery store. Everything is in relationship with everything else. and we're very conscious of that relationship, and everything is built around relationship, and relationships are built mutually around the needs of both members of the relationship. And that's in opposition to this sort of extractive model, that's built around efficiency, that isn't in
That
relationship
and
with the
like to me, the
place other
Excel
than
stuff
an
tends to run
extractive
itself into
one.
the ground.
Mm-hmm. We
Sorry.
Ashley, my friend Ashley Fitzgerald, she's a founder of this podcast, one of them, and she has a term she calls spreadsheet brain, which is exactly what we're talking about. It's such a wonderful term, and it's exactly. I mean, we're defining spreadsheet brain. I think right now, it's when you think of the world in those terms instead of in relationship terms.
That and like there's a fantastic paper I read about Burlington, Iowa. I think Burlington, Iowa is a fascinating place to study for this moment where this young man who's from there studied the town in the 60s and studied it now. And in the 60s, everything was locally owned, most businesses, and now almost nothing is. They're not even barely American owned. And the way they treat their workers is so vastly different. I mean, that spreadsheet brain, you lose the humanity. When when an owner works in a community, you care. I mean, first of all, you see actually kind of see it in St. Louis a lot with Budweiser. Budweiser used to donate a lot to the community. Now they don't.
Mm.
They don't care. They're just everything becomes devoid of meaning. And here's the thing: they tend to crash and burn. I can usually tell when like a spreadsheet brain has taken over a thing because it just corners. You start cutting bone at some point. You know what I mean? There's only so much fat you can trim,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean that's why going back to Perkins is why Perkins is in free fall. It's not good food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one last thing I wanted to say about this, and then I kind of wanted to make sure to get a little more to the diagnosis of this. But when we're thinking about spreadsheet brain, one of my concerns right now too is that it seems to have spread to sort of like the climate change, environmental carbon dioxide world, in which I think when I see in regenerative ag, it's sort of like, well, we're focused now on just like how much carbon can you put in the ground, things that can be measured rather than like, hey, okay, well, hold on, we need to think about practices, we need to think about whole ecosystems. And I think there's this sort of like spreadsheet myopia that's sort of like taking root there as well that worries me.
But I would add a layer onto it. To me, a lot of that's just a lot of corporate BS where certain powers that be want to maintain the system.
Mm-hmm.
So like you have JBS, my slaughtering baron, they're the largest meat packer in the world, and they want to pretend they're like sustainable. And it's like, as long as you're doing beef production in Amazon rainforest, there's nothing that will be sustainable about that. So they just finance a lot of this junk science to basically justify their destructive business practices. You see in dairy, like these manure digesters, like this kind of blew my mind. Like when a cow defecates on land, she's fertilizing her own feed. When you shove her into a metal shed, first of all, you need fossil fuels to grow her feed. And then when you pool her manure when she's indoors, that creates additional methane gas. So then they're trying to basically take these highly subsidized taxpayer manure digesters, and they're actually using money from family farms to build these things to capture the methane gas that they're producing indoors. And it's like family farmers doing regenerative pasture, whatever you want to call it, don't have this issue. Like we don't need to like justify a destructive, broken business practice. Let's just go back to an old-fashioned one that's worked and better for the climate.
Yeah.
And also, like, we shouldn't be doing dairy production in Mexico. Like, there's a reason why it originated in upstate New York and Wisconsin. It made sense from like an ecological standpoint. The water, the grass, what you need. The only reason why they did in New Mexico is when you put that many cows in one area, it smells awful, and there's no one to complain about the manure smells. So they're just massive lots that smell awful.
Yeah, and you can kind of see how this again when you make everything about efficiency, you homogenize everything because you would at some point, and it's obviously you look around the world, it's different bioregions have different cuisines based on what grows well in that particular ecology. But that's not really a thing anymore. It's like basically the regional cuisine kind of is limited to a few techniques and a few different spices, but basically it's the same food packaged different ways. Whereas it would be, hey, this is the food that grows well here, and this is the time of year. Like it's built around what the region produces well.
That to me is thing that's underappreciated. That's been lost. You should be eating more seafood in New England than you should eat more pork in Iowa. It just makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But these systems don't want that. That I noticed that is I was in upstate Maine, and then I've been in the Arkansas Delta, and you're like, why am I getting the same meal? And it's kind of And it goes back to that loss of local places maintain those cultural traditions. Like, Denny's is not going to do that for us.
No. So I think we've done a pretty decent job of identifying, like what the problem is, at least as much as we can do in a half hour. But I want to think about how it got this way. I mean, is this just, to lob you a softball you can run with here? Is this just the result of the free market? Is this just how it works? Is this free market capitalism, or is there something else at play?
It's almost the opposite of free market capitalism, where I don't know why it didn't dawn on me until recently, where the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly. You don't want the free market. The free market's hard. It's ruthless. It's competitive. Every day you have to wake up and be like, how do I beat my opponent? By getting to monopoly, that's where profits are. And so you have an inherent tension between government wanting competitive markets, so farmers get a fair price, workers get paid well, consumers get innovation, all that kind of stuff, and business not. And I just think we went so far off the rails. To like my libertarian friends, what I always say is like, take JBS. JBS is the closest thing we have to a criminal organization, modern day corporate America. They straight up pled guilty to bribing their way to monopoly level status.
That chapter was wild. Like, they are literally just a criminal organization.
They're thugs. They are. And here's the thing. It's kind of what I know. I didn't even know this stuff. I didn't realize how bad it was. Like, it's because it came out right when the 2020 election was happening. So I just got lost. And like, it's just, how can you bribe your way to monopoly level status and like keep your empire? Like that
and then the fines, they just bank on it. They're like, oh yeah, you'll fine us and we'll pay it. And that's just a part of doing business. It made me like, why can't we just have a corporate death penalty? This is what I'm, as I'm reading that chapter, I'm like, they just need to be fined, not millions, but billions until they, yeah. Anyway.
No, when I read that chapter, I just view them as like, it's a kid that's never been disciplined. Mm-hmm. So they're going to keep pushing the envelope. And to me, my anger in that chapter is actually at Secretary Vilsack. Mm-hmm. I've never seen a more incompetent public servant where it's like, this is one of the most, fixing the meat market, I really think is one of the most bipartisan modern issues in America. And his inability to not only do anything, but it's gotten worse the last 4 years, just infuriates me.
Yeah, it's reading your book, I'm like, this is why I get mad at at both parties. It's like, really our choice is like historically been, we have Kim Reynolds or Tom Vilsack. Like, come on, that's not a choice.
Here's the thing. On the flip side, though, is this book has been received on both sides of the aisle really well.
That's amazing.
And that is like, that was a big goal of mine. Is you want to get things done in America, you have to put together weird bedfellows. And I want to show people like there really is something here, because everyone's being kind of screwed right now. And that's usually what happens though with monopolists, is they just go too far. And so like, this is, to me, just going back to my point on libertarianism, is what classic monopolists do is they engage in regulatory capture. They push a lot of regulations on the smaller producers to keep them out, because trust me, they will not give you an ounce of market share. Like, don't be naive. And they will undermine anyone that threatens their empire. And so at some moments like this, you just need a cleansing moment. You need a Teddy Roosevelt thing. You need to restore the free market. And this isn't hard. We did this a century ago. We're not talking AI. We're talking hogs. And so it's restore competition to these markets. So you can let new, producers thrive, let new things happen. That's the other thing too to keep in mind, is just how stale so much has gotten. I noticed at the grocery store where, Walmart doesn't want to have some local business on their shelf, or someone that can only do 10 stores. And so that's why everything's just kind of the same. It's why you get a bunch of new kinds of Oreos, but there's really no new product innovation.
Yeah, you can put different flavors in it, same product, just you make the filling yellow and call it lemon. Look at that, you got a choice now.
Yeah, and it's just like because part of it too is they want to own that. They want to own that whole shelf. They want to crowd out anyone else from coming in.
So one thing as we're talking about, I kind of think it would be good, and you can pick a different one if you like to illustrate this regulatory capture, to illustrate this how it got this way. I thought it was really easy to understand and a really good description of like the checkoff program. If you could like maybe describe, you can pick another one if you want. That's one that really spoke to me about how this is how it works. This is how the whole farce of ag being free market is really illustrated well in a program like this.
It's also a really good example of good intentions gone astray.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I'm glad you picked that, because that was the one thing in my book I was determined to include, and because it's so nerdy to write about. But I just think checkoffs are everything. I don't think any real reforms will come in the food system until they're dealt with. So for your listeners, checkoffs come out of the New Deal, and they were good intentions. It comes out of Florida. Drink more Florida orange juice. You pay a low tax producers into your commodity to advertise it. Here's the thing. Most of them don't matter. There's like 20 some checkoffs in America. There's a Christmas tree. There's a popcorn. They're small. They're like $1 million. And, they're the things that kind of pay for things at fair. They hand out free samples and all that. Meat and dairy are a different beast, and dairy especially. It really started to change in the 80s. As we start overproducing a few things, the checkoffs became, how do we get you to consume that additional surplus? So how do we get you to eat more cheese and ice cream? And what these checkoffs first did is they got milk campaigns. But they realized is these advertising campaigns really didn't work. I mean, America's milk consumption keeps going down. And so what you see happen is basically instead of finance doing these advertising campaigns, it's filled the void of the privatization of our land grants. So you see a lot of junk science. To dairy here's the thing, it's a $600 million pot of money. And there's so many reports by the Government Accountability Office at USDA and the Inspector General just saying how much awful oversight there's been.
So you're saying a $600 million in the checkoff program?
Each year, just in dairy alone.
Ooh.
Which is wild. I mean, the bigger, we'll come back to dairy in a second. This is underappreciated, is the largest parent of the pork checkoff is a Chinese multinational, Smithfield. They own 1 in 4, 1 in 5 hogs. So the voice of the Pork Association is really the voice of the Chinese multinational, which is incredibly scary. But back to dairy. So Mike and Sue, what's really fascinating about them as dairy barons is they didn't come from farm families. I mean, I can both critique people, and you also have to admire what they did. And what they saw what happened to the hog industry in Iowa in the 90s. When the markets just bottomed out, there's overproduction, and the family farmers left in droves. They didn't want to go down like that. So they were determined to make a premium patent product. So they were originally in California and then New Mexico, and they were testing this out at HEB grocery stores down in Texas to get this Fairlife milk, which is basically, to quote one Coke executive, twice the price of normal milk at half the cost. It has an incredibly long shelf life. It's really high in protein content, less carbs, all that kind of stuff. It's engineered for that upper class suburban family, and unexpectedly, young men love it because of the protein content. Like if you go to any gym in America, a lot of young men are drinking Core Power. So Mike and Duke created this patent milk, but here's the thing. Their main competition was normal milk. So they didn't like the checkoff. Why are we paying into a program that's advertising their competitors? So they seemingly financed a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court to get them out of the checkoff. They lost. And it appears they got into bed with the checkoff. They made peace. And what I mean by that is a few things. Number one, the development with Fairlife was, checkoff money went into it. So we have money from family farmers going into this privatized gain thing. Second, you had all this science from the checkoffs, using the research, these digesters, issues that family farms on pastures do not have. And then the third thing is he built this big tourist attraction, like one of the largest in Indiana, between Indianapolis and Chicago, advertising his industrial dairy thing called Fair Oaks Adventure. And so here you have money from family farmers going broke, using advertising a industrial model, driving them into bankruptcy, used against them. And then on top of all this corruption is these checkoffs drive the revolving door at USDA. And I think the best example of that is Secretary Vilsack. Between serving for President Biden and Obama, he served as an industrial dairy lobbyist, where his job was to basically gut Canada as a family farm dairy system. And his goal was to essentially gut it so we can dump our surplus cheese and ice cream on them. And that to me is like, it's just, how wild is that? You know what I mean? Like what started off, this little program has just gotten way out of hand. I mean, here's the thing. I do all these critiques. I think one of the most interesting things here are people trying to fix it. You have Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts working with Mike Lee of Utah to fix the checkoff program. Because they're just, why should your tax dollars be used against you? And also, you should have the option of not even paying into it.
Yeah, if this is a marketing program, it seems like, if that's one that doesn't, further your own interest, you shouldn't be required to participate.
Yeah, and like it's what's really scary to me here is a lot of the pork farmers actually in law that you can vote to abolish the checkoff, and that's what the pork farmers did in the 90s. And you had the USDA secretaries basically throw out that vote.
So you can't do that.
No, I mean that is I was just telling someone the other night over dinner. I don't think there's been a single good agriculture secretary in my lifetime. Both parties.
Yeah, they seem pretty uniformly terrible. And it's all a story. I mean, it's all a story of public, public funds used for private gains, and consolidation of power.
Yes.
That's the story, to make the big industrial players bigger and face less competition. And this is done with this collusion between these players, and the USDA.
They captured USDA. USDA is the chamber of commerce for big ag.
Yeah.
I mean, by every metric, they failed. I mean, for every dollar you spent, the store farmers get the lowest ever recorded. I think a conversation should be had over stripping them for parts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, take antitrust. I mean, the Federal Trade Commission polices the competition stuff in America. It's actually, that young woman, Lena Khan, is...
Oh, yeah.
True. This sounds weird to say. She's a living historical figure. Like, you just know, like, textbooks are beginning to be written on her, biographies. I mean, her victory against Google as a monopoly last month is a big deal. And, it's one, I mean, you have Matt Gaetz praising her in the Wall Street Journal. I mean, she's one of the most popular bipartisan things because she's taking on concentrated power. But here's the thing. She can do most markets, including grocery stores, but she can't maintain competition in the meat packing. USDA has a carve out.
And they are not going to do it.
Yeah, and it's just like maybe we should give that power to the Federal Trade Commission, because it's clear USDA is incompetent at this right now.
Yeah, I tweeted the other day. I was like, abolish the USDA, and it's just this. It's like, strip it for parts. It's not doing its intention. It's clearly doing more harm for good. And and you can look at how this has happened in any area. I mean, you could, like, they've taken over. The large agriculture interests have taken over the land grant universities, and the research agenda at those places has been. There are green shoots. I think there's kind of some interesting stuff happening now, but I mean, for decades, it was just really it was a propaganda arm almost for this particular way of doing business. And so between the universities and the USDA, it's just this incredible capture that has put us on this on this path.
But then here's the flip side. One good secretary could really change things. I mean, again, the pinata is so big to go after these meat companies, to do something right here. The politics are just too good where someone's going to do something. I mean, people are just being gouged left and right at the store. I mean, industry loves to say this system makes cheap food, but that's just not factually true. When you use USDA's own data, when Americans spend at the grocery store, and this is from 2021 before all this inflation stuff really took hold, we spend more money on food than like Germany, United Kingdom, Canada, and we're about dollar for dollar with Italy. And trust me, a dollar for food in Italy is very different than here. Like, we're basically paying more for garbage. And especially in the meat and dairy case. I mean, that's the thing most salient to people. And so someone's going to do something. I'm just like that. That's what gives me hope here. This thing has run its course.
Well, that is the justification. So let's dig into this a little more. It's like, well, this is just industrial production. I mean, this is just how you get cheap food, and so there's two ways to go from that. One is like to say, food shouldn't be so artificially cheap and subsidized, and the other, but what I hear you saying is that it's like it's not as cheap as you think it is.
So two things. One is, here's the thing, like, just look at the meat industry. I mean, there's so many lawsuits you have Chick-fil-A suing the chicken companies for being gouged. You know what I mean? They're acting like cartels, but that's what, concentrated markets do. I mean, just the other day I was telling someone, I was shocked at Hy-Vee that they had Lay's for $6 a bag. And you're like, there's a glut in the potato market right now. Like literally, they had sacks of potatoes for 99 cents. How does frying a potato make it $6?
Mm-hmm.
It's just because they can. To go back to the point on cheap food, and this is like the nerd in me. So when farm big ag talks, what they tend to say is, "Oh, percent of income is the Americans spend the least amount of their income on food."
Yes.
Here's the thing: you can't, if you put that number right next to per capita, like what you actually like dollar amount. Our country is so unequal. You can't use percent of income. Like what really
Right.
for the bottom
We're
half.
rich. We're an extremely rich country, right? So like percent of income, it's very small, not because the dollar amount's very small, but because we're just freaking rich.
But some of us are.
Yeah. Oh, of course. I'm just talking
That's the
an
thing.
average. I'm just talking
Yeah,
average.
average because like it's we're kind of like what they oh god what's that term when you have two like humps. So like for every Boston people that like tons of pharmaceutical money jobs, and then you have like Burlington, their incomes have been stagnant. What you spend in the register matters so much more percent of income. And when you look at the register, we're spending more. And like it's, I mean, what shocked me in this book stuff has been like the business traveler has taken really well to my book. Like this sells really well in airports, and which is I think it's kind of cool to like see your own book in an airport. But I went on Bloomberg, and like you have a lot of yuppies in America. They go abroad and they just realize how much better the food is abroad.
Mm-hmm.
Is you taste like a good melon, you have a good piece of bacon, that kind of stuff. So that's why I always love to use that per capita food expenditure, because it's just you can measure things different ways and they tell different stories. Like for example, one good example of that is actually poverty in America. You can look at one poverty metric and you're like, oh, it's poverty is low in America. And it's like, I'm sorry, have you been to a city in America? Have you seen the homelessness? Have you seen how many people are on food stamps? Have you seen how many, you know what I mean? Like you can, different measurements will tell you very different stories. And I prefer to use the per capita one for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things, in that same interview with Greg, he was talking about how, these metrics, you have to be careful because figures lie and liars figure.
That's a great line. Also keep in mind the people doing it right don't get the subsidies.
That's the thing, right? And that's why I think that's why people are like, well, gosh, yeah, if we built this alternative, like if you're doing it, if you're regenerative, like my food is expensive, at this point, and that's, but like it's just you can't compare these two systems at this point. One is like you're literal. I mean, it's the American idea of like you're pulling it up by your bootstraps. We have all these small and medium sized farmers who are trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps in this system that's not developed for them, versus these industries that have captured regulation, and make it so that make it so that the small guys can't get slaughtering slots and make it so they have to do everything and invent everything for themselves. While they've captured the regulatory apparatus and allow the middlemen basically to capture everything. So you just, when you compare these two, you look like, oh wow, like this alternative farming, whatever you want to call it. I don't like that term. It's just going to make expensive food. And I'm like, well, yeah, in the environment in which one side has all of the power, that is going to be the case.
Yeah, and it's just like everything you eat is subsidized. The question is to what degree. And like you see it, like take pop and carrot juice. There's so much subsidy going into the pop, into corn syrup. Whereas that carrot juice is getting no subsidy. So it's just, of course, like one's artificially cheaper than the other.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, we can choose to subsidize pasture regenerative beef to make it affordable. But I just go back to the simple thing of like, it takes money to be healthy in America now.
Yeah.
I mean, what's shocked me is how much I've noticed with a lot of these migrants in America. Like, I'm out east pretty often for work, and how obese a lot of these migrants are.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think underappreciated is, I mean, look at Iowa. Iowa's one of the most obese states in the country. And you're like, it's just so much processed foods. And like this stuff is, I don't think we've grappled. It's funny. Again, like, to be honest with you, one of the hardest things to write about in this book was the obesity stuff. Because it's framed as a personal thing it's just so clearly structural.
Clearly structural. I mean, if you look at things in the aggregate, I mean, you just step back for a second to see the forest for the trees, and it's just obviously structural.
But it's really, people are really sensitive to talking about this. And it's just something, I don't know. I mean, the thing to keep in mind too is this food is the processed food. It's engineered to be addictive. Like it's like Cheez-Its. Like you can never have just one Cheez-It, and it's just,
They're not even going to lie about that. Once you pop, you can't stop.
no,
like they're pretty straightforward about what they're doing. Like,
yeah,
you can't stop eating this, so go buy it now. You can't stop. Don't try.
it is. And it's just, that's a really funny example. And so you're just running uphill. I mean, it also kind of pushes your taste buds in certain ways. And it's, I mean, I've had to personally change my diet habits over the last few years where, you get so used to the junk and where it's just like, that's kind of what your body wants. And it just, I don't know. I really don't like sweet things anymore. It took me a while to kind of relearn.
Oh man, I can't imagine. I can't imagine weaning off of my ice cream.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm recently addicted to Tillamook's chocolate fudge ice cream. That stuff is so good.
Mm.
But no, I mean, like even pop. I used to drink a ton of Diet Mountain Dew growing up, and I can't drink it anymore. It just doesn't. I don't like it.
Yeah. So let's. I kind of want to, and I like to, and I love sort of your framing and kind of how you've had the experience of finding receptivity to this on, both sides of the aisle or across the ideological spectrum, because I do think that it is an issue that we should be able to come together on a lot of these things. But one of the things I think is a sticking point, and I'm curious. A lot of people will say things like more of the harder edge libertarians might say something. Well, yeah, the regulatory capture is because of the USDA and because of the government. So therefore, the government has no role in getting out of this. We just need to cut subsidies and let it go. And I'm wondering what how you might think about that, and how like what actions can we take. There's the ones that would just be purely negative, like just ending certain programs. But I personally think that because basically the agenda of the industrial agriculturalists has been so successful, right? If we were to just completely decimate industrial ag right now, we would have a really hard time, making all the food that we needed to eat. So to me, there is actually we do need to build a stronger, system. And I don't think, as somebody who's, trying to do this, I don't think it's reasonable to expect that people are just going to do it through the free market. I just don't think that that's plausible, because we need to replicate Greg Gunthorpe, right? And we need to have a lot of people doing this, and I think that that's going to need a concerted society-wide effort, otherwise known as politics.
So I'm glad you said that, because to be frank, I view the work I'm doing now as work for my grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to get to the promised land overnight. It took decades. It's going to take decades to get to that new system. I totally understand why more libertarian types don't trust the government. Because here's the thing: how many secretaries of agriculture have you heard do that little dance of "I'm going to do something about monopolies"?
All of them.
All of them. And here's the thing: that's why I really push people. You can't fight this alone. You need to join a group. You need to join a farmers union. You need to join some kind of thing, because you're busy, you're working. You also need that sense of, that team aspect to kind of keep fighting the good fight. But also, you got to start these organizations, and I've been telling a lot of them, you got to push people forward. Because when you elect a president, you're electing 4,000 appointees. Imagine if Greg Gunthorpe was Secretary of Agriculture, or Undersecretary who oversees the checkoffs. You know what I mean? You put good people in positions of power, not career types, you're going to get a different system. Personnel is policy. And that to me is you just need people with political courage to do the right thing here. That's the big thing. And so honestly, I don't think people are going to trust it until they start seeing results. You need to get good people in positions of power and start driving the change, showing, going back to Lena Khan. I mean, the fact that she's putting points in the board, it's empowering, but it invigorates the agencies. Kids want to work there, recent college grads. People want to come forward and then tell their story. Hey, I was abused by this company. because they don't want, why go out on a limb if you don't think an agency is going to do anything? Why speak up? Why rock the boat? So that's the thing too. So it's like, there's a little bit of trust, but I really want to encourage people to join organizations. Because I also think there's kind of an epidemic of loneliness that's underappreciated, and just being in a group. You gotta trust me. Doing this kind of work, you're gonna throw 10 rocks at the wall, and you just need one to break through, but 9 won't.
Yeah. So my day job is I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. So that's, and you say epidemic of loneliness. I'm like, well, now we're connecting some dots here, because that's absolutely what, people are struggling with, generally. And it's another, I think, at least in the area where I live, side effect of sort of the great depopulation of the Midwest. There's other comparable and different loneliness problems in more urban areas, but in the rural areas, it's communities not functioning like communities in the way they did 20, 30 years ago.
Because it's also just a few things to add on there is, people are just the money's so tight. They don't have the time to like engage in civil activities. You're also like, you're working insane hours. You're tired. On the flip side, what's been really encouraging to me is just how popular farmers markets have gotten in Iowa. And even like they have these night markets where they're just kind of a market of everything. You have people selling, they might work a full-time job somewhere, but then, they craft on the side, or they do woodworking on the side and they sell it. They'll sell beer out. And it's just so good for people to socialize. I mean, it is like the thing in Cedar Rapids now when they have these night markets, because it's just, you walk around downtown, you have a beer, your kid play, go sees a clown. Like, and it's also just like, it's these interactions that really, you get humanity in each other. You see the other side where, a big goal of mine of this book is my goal is to make change here. Like, I am proselytizing. Each chapter's argumentative essay to me is, my goal is not to score political points. I don't want to be like, you're wrong. Is how do I find common ground with someone, and how do we move this in a positive direction?
Yeah, and that's and then that's food is how culture is built, and so I think right there, it's like cultures are built around food, and we have a culture built around this really distorted monstrosity, and I think it affects a lot more than people think it affects. I think how we produce our food affects our culture in ways that aren't not readily visible at first glance. It sends ripples throughout just sort of like how we behave as people.
Going back to that though, because you talked earlier, and I made note of this, is how do we need that transition. And to me, one of the best things that help drive this transition are actually schools. Mm-hmm. Institutional buyers. They buy so much food. From my experience, a lot of farmers don't like the farmers market. You get rained out, kind of inconsistent income. But you get that contract from your school where I'm delivering X amount each week to this school. And a lot of community colleges, especially in the Midwest, actually have really good culinary programs. So imagine you can just go to community college, and then you just go to your local school and you make scratch cooking. And you're like, okay, what's the surplus? What crops do we have this week? Okay, let's do something. Or what's going on in social studies? Okay, let's make rice pudding to teach the kids about the Silk Road. You know what I mean? Like, there's really cool ways to do this. You're adding value. You're adding like respect and pride to that job. That used to be just a glorified, you're cooking frozen pizza. You're stabilizing those people trying to do it right. You're trying to grow them, because that's what I want to focus on. Because it's also good food for our kids. It's good politics. Like, who doesn't want your money, local? Who doesn't want to all be served in Illinois, coming from Illinois ranchers? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, it seems to me that there's like a two-pronged approach here. On the one, we're really talking about building this, building small and mid-scale producers, rebuilding our ability to produce food locally, rebuilding our ability to, handle, distribute food at a smaller scale. So that's one. It's a building project, which is kind of inherently fun and exciting, actually. And like you're talking about, institutional buyers are a great way to fuel that, right? Because those dollars this is where. The voting with your fork, I don't think is a great way to think about it. You're not going to starve JBS, like by voting with your forks. Like you're absolutely not. But what you can do is build something else, because it matters to smaller and medium sized producers that, and so in that case it does matter. So if you think about it less in terms of like, oh, I want to, I don't approve of this, but in more in terms of like, oh, hey, I want to buy this because I want to build, I want to support something else. I think that's a way to think about it that can be helpful. So we're building something else, but at the same time, in order to build something else, and the other part where I say two-pronged for, is it really, we need to take a hatchet to these barons, like with like a really aggressive, like a policy-wise violent, not violent, but that sort of energy of just like they need to be attacked and really taken down about 20 notches.
Yes, I find that to be the fun part too. But that's just
yes, happy warriors. We need that too.
Yeah. But I mean, you got to lean into the David versus Goliath of it all. You're never going to be dollar for dollar with them, and I find it fun.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to building, I mean, the big thing too is there's always going to be issues when you build, and like even getting food locally. I mean, it sounds easy, but there's a lot of hurdles to cover. But you got to document them. Work with your local congressman, your local state senator, state rep, whatever, and be like, hey, we're trying to do this. We hit this issue. Can you help us here? Because most of them, people just don't know. I mean, it sounds weird to say, you have to accept that you're kind of blazing your own trail here. And a lot of the best stuff like this in America, it starts at the local level, and you got to show proof of concept. You don't go 0 to 100 overnight. And so by like making a really good set piece that does all this, and then guess what? Politicians love it. They'll come take photos, and then you kind of build on it. Other communities see it. You know what I mean? That's tends the way America works. And I actually think it's the best of America is that laboratories of democracy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be top down, and it never usually is. But you're right. You need to grow a new one as you deconstruct, attack, whatever word you want to use, the old one. I mean, and lean into it. I mean, we've been here before. I mean, that's why I like that little example of the Ritz Carlton and my dairy barons living there. I love that little example because I don't care what your political party is. That's morally wrong that a dairy farmer, someone who claims to be a dairy farmer lives at the Ritz Carlton in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, something's obviously, wrong with that picture. And so, yeah, we have this two-prong we're building at the same time. And this is where, it's just federal power is going to be essential. And I know that Greg has a really terse description of what he views, and he talks about subsidy reform being, essential. And that's at a federal level, reforming how we do subsidies. Antitrust we're talking about right now. I mean, we need to come in with the antitrust hatchet. He talks a lot about truth in labeling, because right now you can go to the grocery store and they can essentially say whatever they want. It's regulated, but those regulations are captured by JBS, who can put the stuff on their packaging that's just plainly misleading. Inspection reform, ending the checkoff program, rearranging the USDA if we want to get really radical, or like partitioning it off to various other agencies. What are your thoughts on that list, and what would you add, or when you just think about like this, like actual policies that would move forward reform?
Those are the big ones. I mean, the way I said earlier, everything you just said is traditional. It is radical that the amount of, the fact that Bill Gates gives as much heavily subsidized crop insurance as he wants, because he's one of the largest owners of farmland in America. Like, that's insane. I'm a fan of bright line rules. I mean, I'm married to a lawyer, and like lawyers make their living by like anytime there's gray is exploiting that gray. So the simpler you keep things, the more likely you're going to have success.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, for example, one rule I would do in the meat system is a packer ban. Once you're over a certain size, you cannot own the animals you slaughter. Here's the thing. Iowa has that rule in the books. We don't enforce it. Smithfield cuts a check to Iowa State every few years, and we ignore it. I'm not even joking. If you enforce that rule, you'd break up most of the meat companies.
So you can't, what's the rule?
It's called a packer ban.
Mm-hmm.
You can't own the animal you slaughter. It basically stops corporations from owning animals.
Okay. And so then they're having to buy all of their animals at that point. They don't, yeah.
You're stopping vertical what they call it, horizontal consolidation. Where they're trying to own the whole thing. You want to stop that.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of putting up these roadblocks to stop things like that. It's kind of like part of it is I come out of the alcohol system because of my dad and my grandpa, where, we saw that with prohibition. Is part of what led to prohibition was companies were selling booze at a loss to get you drunk, to then make your money gambling, whatever, other drugs. And so you had a societal revolt over all this bad stuff. And so when we legalized alcohol again, we put in these barriers where if you brew beer, distribute it, and you sell it are three different things. Once you're over a certain size. So my dad worked at a distributor who distributed Budweiser, and then he sold it to Hy-Vee. You know what I mean? Like, you purposely want to almost stop that cult of efficiency.
Yeah.
Because it's like, in the day, alcohol's a drug. It's a wonderful product for a good time, but it can be taken too far. So how do you put up these things? We don't go down that road again. So that's the way I like to think, is like, how do you stop that? How do you stop, if a goal of any corporate executive is monopoly, how do you kind of throw out roadblocks? So with that mindset, that's like one I like. I'm even kind of entertaining the idea of once you're over a certain size, you can only slaughter one protein. Because right now, all the big meat companies slaughter all 3 or 4 proteins. So just kind of like that's
Yeah, that you can't gain when it's very, very, very clear. It's like that's how the federal government works a lot of times, right? You see these bills that take 200 pages to say something that could be said in a page. Well, those extra 199 pages are for the lawyers to come in and figure out how to get around it.
Yes. So like go back to Lena Khan, non-competes. You just can't have a non-compete. And she had like 3 or like small little things. If you're a CEO, things like that. Don't overthink this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if anything, what I've been pushing, I really encourage people to do is think about what the system should be. So much of this moment is people trying to take laws from the 1920s and apply them to 2024. And it's like, I'm sorry, you know what I mean? Like, that was before refrigeration.
Right.
Start thinking that way. Like, what should a modern dairy system look like? What should the milk order look like? How should we regulate data and tractors? Like, how do you stop? People don't realize both the Koch brothers and Cargill have massive trading platforms, and they own the pipelines. A lot of them, they own the movement of these goods and all that stuff. And, they probably have informational advantages when they're trading on the futures markets. How do you stop that? It's easy to critique, but to me, you got to figure out what the system should be. Like, what are these certain road guardrails should we put into the system to like help foster a healthy, innovative system?
Yeah, and I like the bright line addition to that, and it's kind of why I say things like, "Well, we need to take a hatchet or a machete, not so much a scalpel, because when you're doing the scalpels, like that's the way it works right now, is death by nuance." And I'm not saying that that's always the case. Nuance is important in life and in many things, but also at some point you have to make it so dead simple that there's no way around it, and that's how bureaucratic regulations seem to work to me. It's just everything becomes so obscure that Vilsack can say he's doing one thing on the one hand. He seems to be a master of that. Like I loved your anecdote in the book. I mean, love it. I hated it. About he on the one hand was running initially as governor to and stated opposition to the port consolidation. Meanwhile, he had voted for it while he was in office as a state senator. It's like, oh, they talk out of both sides of their mouth.
It's even worse than that. And this is that example right there. Is actually what shaped me the most on him. It showed me how hollow his words are. Is only the governor of Iowa can stop confinement construction in Iowa. And his re-election campaign was centered on this issue. Like, he actually ran against the head lobbyist from a hog baron. He promised to do something, ran ads. After he won, those next 4 years, not only did he not do anything, he oversaw the largest expansion of hog confinement in Iowa history. That destroys democracy. Is people get vested in a thing, they try to do the right thing, and when they see someone stab them in the back like that, they give up. That is like what I've noticed in a lot of rural communities is a sense of Stockholm syndrome. They fought power and they lost. As someone told me, is life gets complicated if you start thinking about it too much, because like your home values kind of collapse if you live next to one of these facilities. You can't afford to move to where your kids are in the city. They're just happy to have these jobs at some point. Like, I understand that, because they can't even imagine a system without this. Like this, they can't imagine a system other than what they have now, and it's heartbreaking. I mean,
Yeah.
that is like talking to the hog. When I was researching that chapter, the 90s were everything in Iowa, and I kept doing this thing where I wanted to research people. I would see them quoted in some article in 1998. I would reach out to them and be like, "Tell me how, you know what I mean? Like, I want to hear what's happened since then." And I was talking with these people. It was really sad. It was painful for them to talk about it because they haven't really processed that they've lost, and like people don't. It's you think about anything in your personal life where something didn't pan out, and you almost just want to paper over it and move on because it's hard. It's hard to really simmer in that.
Yeah, it's been a social and economic and ecological Armageddon through the Midwest in the last 40, 50 years. I mean, that's true.
But it's that's why I'm not a believer in incrementalism. You know what I mean? Like I view this book as like I'm trying to put on a show. It's writing a good report will not change anything. We didn't get here overnight, and you got to shake up the system.
And another thing I really liked about your book, actually, by focusing on barons, you put names of people. And I'm not saying like that's great as far as like, oh, we should go harass those people, but it's important to name there's people doing these things, right? There's human beings making these decisions and being corrupt with other human beings. Because I think sometimes when we think about it, it's so overwhelming. It's like these big systems, and it obscures the fact that there are actually like bad actors bribing people and doing awful things, and need to be held to account. Humans, people, not just, multinationals.
I'm glad you said that because it's what I've learned is two things. One, no one's the villain in their own story. So a lot of these people actually drink their own Kool-Aid.
Oh, yeah.
And by putting this out there, it's like, no, you're having a reckon. Like you need to see, your grandkids need to see your legacy. And like never, and this might just be my like Catholicism, like I joke to my partner, my husband's Jewish, that this is like very Old Testament. Like sometimes you just need to like really shame people.
Yeah.
But also naming names you need to humanize people. You need to. I want to name names because I want to humanize it, but also it's just so cartoonish. Like it's by showing how cartoonish they are, it actually weirdly I find empowers people.
I agree.
Because it's just like
people. People can be defeated.
Just people, and they have a certain image they'll construct, and then when you see this, you're just like, oh, this is just kind of sad and trashy, and like kind of like, what is wrong with you? What's wrong with your moral core that you're doing this?
Yeah, and I think that's true for the barons you talk about, and then, I mean, Tom Vilsack is a really good punching bag in your book, which deservedly so, but and I hope that he needs all the pressure that he can get. I mean, he was the ag secretary for 2 Democratic presidents, and I think that we need to let the Democratic Party know that like this is not acceptable. So Vilsack really needs to be, metaphorically tarred and feathered, and to be known that we're not going to accept this crap anymore.
And that is like and I got a lot of pushback on that for a while. Like Vilsack is no different than Earl Butz in my head. They're the same. They're just corporate hacks.
No, it's the same. They're all one person.
Yeah, they're all. Life is easy if you do the bidding of the rich. And also, like, they're not going to save us. That's kind of like the weird thing I realized from being at Yale for a while is like, oh, like there's just in general in America an elite rot that's been underappreciated. I mean, corruption is not, you don't hand people bribes anymore unless you're JBS. Like there's all these legalized bribery that goes on now. But it's the same thing.
It's just laundered to look different, but it is bribery. The bribery is everywhere. Just, there's plausible deniability, I suppose.
Yeah. And it's just, change won't come from them though. And so I find that empowering. It's just, it's people outside of those worlds being like, I mean, never forget, the first antitrust laws in the world come out of the Midwest, come out of Iowa, actually. And it was pissed off farmers being gouged by railroads. And you know what I mean? You didn't get Teddy Roosevelt overnight. Teddy Roosevelt was the result of decades of work. I mean, this started the state. These were groups pushing states. States did the right thing. And then the feds did something. And then even when we passed antitrust laws at the national level, it took a few presidents until we finally had one that did something. So like when we tell history, we compress it, but this stuff is actually kind of elongated. And I think we really are turning a corner right now. And so we know this model is going to run itself into the ground. And so you really got to start thinking now, what should the next system be? Kind of like you talked about building, because like if you don't have a plan, trust me, the checkoff's well. Mm-hmm. So like what's going to happen with post ethanol? You got to start thinking now, like what should that system be? Because I mean, I just think of the 2008 Great Recession is, you know what I mean? We didn't address the fundamental issues, and the big banks just got bigger and no one went to jail. Yeah. And so like that is, here's the thing, you just know another one's going to happen eventually, because that's just how that game goes.
Yeah. And you said, and no one went to jail. There just has to be accountability for some of this stuff, like actual accountability. It's not good enough to do a fine and say, don't do that again. But until we get some accountability for this sort of misbehavior, it won't change.
But that's where people have their own, like, that's where you have power. Is journalists really are your best friends here? Is if you see something, say something. And two examples I love to tell people are, one, Secretary Vilsack's son left the most elite law firm in Iowa to go work for an ethanol baron who's trying to capture gas from ethanol plants, build these pipelines across Iowa, take it up to North Dakota and use it in fracking and call that good for climate. It's that type of corruption that makes people not believe in the system.
It's just corruption. I mean, Vilsack himself, going and working at a dairy lobby in his stint between, like, in what world is this just not naked corruption? It's just naked corruption. Like, these people should be in jail. I'm not even kidding.
But here's the thing. Someone saw that on LinkedIn, his son, and told a journalist. And so that story got out there. Mm-hmm. Journalists are so broke right now. They're moving a mile a minute. In the day, they're storytellers. Reach out to them. Don't be mean. Don't be like, hey, or if you see them phrase something weird, they quote a hack, be like, hey, you should really talk to Greg Gunthorpe. Or you got this wrong. I want to let you know. Or I saw this and you should know. Here's one other example, because it's so ridiculous. You know in Fargo, that scene at the end with the mulcher?
I actually haven't seen that.
Oh, you haven't seen Fargo? It's so good.
No, I never did.
Can I spoil it then for you?
Yes, you may.
He kills someone by throwing the body into a mulcher. So this hog confinement guy in Western Iowa was doing that with his, pigs that didn't make it. 10% of pigs die inside these confinements. Right. And there's supposed to be a whole process you do. He didn't do it. This older woman in Iowa saw it and got pissed. Was like, what the hell are you doing? Called the state. The state didn't do anything. So you know what she did? She called the local Omaha TV news, and it became a big story. And finally the state did something. Mm-hmm. Is you just kind of have to, and what I've noticed too is like the most successful and active people here are actually pissed off old ladies, because they know what the system used to be. They remember what rural America used to be, and they don't want their grandkids living in it. So they're some of the best people in this space. I actually had a few of them I originally had in the book, and they told me they don't want people to know what they do. This is just what they've chosen to do. And so that's the power you have, is just see something, say something. I mean, here one example of Missouri that I love is this pissed off hog farmer who did not like how all those Smithfield CAFOs is. It's really hard to get these records of manure spills and all that kind of stuff. Like a lot of the stuff is paper. You have to go to a courthouse. He spent his retirement and he went through, collected all the manure spills of that Chinese company that's happened in Missouri, and said, this is how much gallon of hog manure they've spilled in our state. And this is the pittance of a fine they paid. That took him years to do that. Mm-hmm. But now we know. Because here's the thing. The state agents in Missouri are not going to do that information. And these companies want to purposely hide it.
Yeah.
But the fact he spent his time doing that, we now know.
And I do agree very much that, you go back 10 or 15 years, there was just that, they were able to suppress a lot of this, and it just wasn't as well known. And I think more and more and more now, I mean, we kind of almost are getting to where there's not opposite problem of too much information and too much noise. That's sort of how the signal is getting hidden now, whereas before the signal would be hidden, like suppressed. Now it's drowned by a ton of other signals. So getting that kind of signal through now has an opposite problem, but it's out there much more than it was. It's like you can learn these things, and you can see factual records of this malfeasance. Like it's not hidden.
People just see what's doing to their bodies. I mean, I'll be frank, writing this book, I got gluten sensitive, which basically, if I have flour, I just blow up, and I hate it because I love pizza. I love that. Um, this garbage is just doing stuff to our bodies in ways that like people know it. I mean,
Autoimmune disease, the rates of autoimmune disease are crazy. Obesity obviously goes without saying. We're not a healthy people right now, and it's because of the food we eat. I mean, it period. Um, there's sedentism and all that might play a small, but it's the food that we eat. That's the problem.
yeah, and that's why I think focusing on school meals, because like especially like nothing. I mean, a pissed off mom gets shit done, and playing into that politics of like making like, don't you want your kids to eat good food at school, local food? I think that's just like such a winning issue that you want to put the industry in a really awkward spot. Like, wait, you don't want to serve local beef to the children? You know what I mean? You want them to like justify their BS.
Yeah.
Because they win when we don't care. Like that is like my thing I realize is the status quo is when they reinforce their power.
Yeah. And they are losing, I think, their most powerful, especially, you use some figures from 21. I mean, the last 3 years, I mean, with inflation, I think their most powerful argument was like, we're going to take all these subsidies and make it and give you this, we can be cheaper than everybody else. You want cheap food? Don't you want cheap food? But the food's not increasingly not cheap, and it's becoming obvious that not only is it not cheap, the reason it is as cheap as it is because they're cheating and stealing public money, and that's why it's as cheap as it is. And it's not even that cheap, because that's always been the argument against the food movement, and there's a lot of sympathy to it. It's like, well, what do you want people to do? You want to spend more money on better food? Like, people can't do that. And so I think there's a lot of people who would dismiss the food movement as just sort of like this elitist sort of thing. It's like it's a concern over, you want your nice fancy food. Go ahead and do that, but it's not. I think we're starting to see more the high cost of artificially cheap food that's actually not that cheap.
Yeah, and like so much of this too is just there's an econ term called negative externalities, like the costs that pushed onto other people, and so we're now seeing the real consequences of how we're bearing the burden of their empire.
Yeah,
for their wealth. I mean, it's the manure stuff,
dirty water everywhere,
and like why? Let's take hogs. I mean, this is the best example of it. Iowa's 25 million hogs. They defecate 3 times more than a human being. So that's manure of 75 million people. That's Texas, California, and Illinois combined. At the same time, and that's just hogs in Iowa. I'm not talking about cattle, chickens, and all that. That regulatory structure has been gutted. So, and also our pork consumption in America is basically flat. And so most of that's for export. Why are we destroying rural Iowa to feed China? Is it worth it?
Well, we're destroying rural Iowa to feed China so that Chinese people can make more money, apparently, right? Like the owners of Smithfield. We're doing it so someone else can make money.
And it's just like, that's the logical extreme, like where we got to this point.
We're also doing it to have very terrible jobs that you wouldn't want your own kids to ever have to do.
And like, that's the funniest thing. 2 things writing this, like talking to people writing this book is, one, how many people, even in these industries, middle management, would talk to me off the record, being like, yeah, like how awful this is. You know what I mean? Like they even know, like they would not tell their kids to do it. Like they did this because this is what they were told to do in the farm crisis. They went to Iowa State. They did this quote industrial thing, and they just think how awful it is too. And then the other thing, real quick, for people that I think is funny is, I was shocked. People reach out to me after reading this book, like, oh, you should look here, yada, yada. By far, Walmart suppliers have been reaching out to me the most.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Because Walmart has so much power, and like there's so many shenanigans Walmart pulls on people, and they just can't, they're just so desperate for help. It's been wild. I mean, the people I've talked to, Walmart suppliers, and I think especially given like so much of the news now is concentrated on the coast, and local news, rural news has been hollowed out. Walmart's firing on all cylinders. Like I actually think Walmart's beating Amazon. Like Walmart online is just as good, or if not better, than Amazon at this point. And it's Walmart. Oh man, I really tell everyone, if you get a chance, I really recommend a road trip to Northwest Arkansas. First of all, it's beautiful nature. The Ozarks are great. The boom down there is
Mm.
incredible. It's going through this mega boom, but it's a really hollow. It's very Brazil. It's very have not. So you have the Walmart workers, like Walmart's building a new Silicon Valley style campus. So you have the white collar workforce, and then you have this dark underbelly where like the child poverty there is higher than the Arkansas Delta. Like it's very, and the question is, it's one of the most unequal metropolitans in America, which is saying something. The question is, do we want to live like that?
No. That's my answer. No. So one of the things right now, as I think we move towards wrapping this up, is I started the conversation talking about, well, like, hey, man, this book got me pissed. But and in the course of this conversation, though, right now I'm feeling very sort of excited and upbeat, because there is, we've lived through it, we've seen it, it's been hit after hit after hit, and I think it's time to embrace like this happy warrior spirit. Like, yeah, like it can be fun. Like, let's fight these giants. Let's have a good time doing it. Let's make it hard for them. Let's have fun with that. Let's fight back. That doesn't have, I think there's some empowering and some good energy in that, as opposed to just like, well, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. Like, we can fight back. We can. It's happening. And building is fun. It's a good life, being on land and tending animals, and we want to make it so that's available to more people, because I truly believe, people say no one wants to farm, no one wants to farm. Well, no one wants to pick berries for like $7 an hour. No, people don't want to do that, and if that's what you're thinking, sure, like people don't want to do that. But what I do, yeah, people want to do that. I promise there's people, if that is available to people and viable, people absolutely want to do that. And there's room for them to do that, because you're not going to be able to farm 10,000 acres and do it, in a way that is good for the land and the people. And so we are going to need more people to do that, and people are going to want to do this. Like I said, it's a good life. And so I think there's reasons to be hopeful, to be optimistic, and to kind of pick up and, to kind of fight the good fight and enjoy that, maybe finally some of these barons are going to sort of start to feel some punches.
Yeah. I mean, what I've really internalized writing this book is most people are good people. Most people are just trying to provide for their family. They want to do the right thing. It's really just a few greedy people holding us back. I mean, you become a baron because you're willing to cross ethical lines that most people aren't willing to cross.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing too is I really want to push people. You got to articulate that positive vision. If you just focus on the dark, people shut down. They feel overwhelmed. And the positive vision, it motivates you. You know what I mean? It helps you rush the gates. It helps you honestly, that's what keeps me going. I mean, it took me a while. I've been simmering in this stuff for years. Like, this book isn't dark to me. This is just the world the way it is.
Yeah.
But I want to be like very clear-eyed for people. Like, this is what's going on. I mean, I feel like parts of America understand this, and the other parts of America are truly naive to it.
Yeah.
And so it's showing people, but then I'm purposely overemphasizing my conclusion of what the system could be, because that is just, I feel like at this moment, what people want is just, I kind of view talking, public speaking, book talks, all that as like stand-up comedy. So much of this is reading your audience, learning the rhetoric. I mean, I've been very fortunate to basically give versions of this talk for the last 5 years at different farm groups. And that's where the phrase "put animals back in the land" came from. It's so simple. It's so simple, but it just feels so right.
Solve so many problems. Just that.
Yeah, like that's the thesis of this book. If my book could be boiled down as "put animals back on the land."
That's brilliant. Brilliant. It's brilliant. That's brilliant.
But it came from people like, again, going back to Greg, people like Greg Gunthorpe. I mean, Greg is fighting the good fight, but he's also willing to talk to people. I mean, he spends his free time. He goes to DC. He talks to different legislators. He talks to different groups. By being out there, he is inspiring people, and people need heroes right now.
He's also funny and good natured, which I think is also tremendously important when we're doing this. That matters.
Totally. And that's why you gotta, I don't know. I mean, I can easily get dark doing this. Trust me, I do.
Mm-hmm.
But you see the Gregs, and I don't know. It's just, this is so stupid, but like, there's no straight flight out of Iowa. So either I connect through St. Louis or Chicago. And like, I think most airport food's just awful and overpriced. But they have Greg's pork at one place in Chicago airport, and that's like the only place I'll eat in that airport. It's like my little thing.
Which one is it?
It's like a Mexican place. I don't remember the name.
Okay, I'll have to find that. That's the.
It's like a tortas, where they like make a compressed sandwich. But they have Greg's name up on the board.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it's funny. It's that there's a big national article in the Washington Post. It's one of the most favorite, highly ranked food options in any airport in America. Yeah, isn't that funny? I mean, let's be honest. The bar's pretty low for airport food. I mean, I think going back to your one last thing I want to add is like with inflation is people are now seeing the real cost of this corporate greed. I had a woman I know in Western Iowa. Her husband and her do, pasture meat, but they also have their own restaurant in town where they serve some of their meat. I had one of the best breakfasts of my life at her restaurant. She had a chorizo skillet. That skillet of local Iowa food was cheaper than a McDonald's meal in O'Hare breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
This stuff is like we're starting to now see the real cost of this crap food, and it's like I don't know. I'm always a believer these things. Greed always goes too far. It crashes and burns. What's next? Let's focus on the what's next.
Boy, that's a great perspective. And just piggybacking on what you just said, I just keep wanting to keep going. But one of the interesting things is, especially because antitrust is at the middle of all this, and recently the price of groceries, Kamala Harris brought it up, and you hear screeching immediately about price controls, as if there is not a whole world of stuff to clean up here. And like, price controls isn't the way to do it, but there's a lot that needs and can be done. And it's pretty telling that the moment somebody wants to touch in on that, that's the screeching, that's the chorus that happens. Like, oh, price controls, it's anti-capitalist, it's communist, it's socialist. Like, hey, we got to be able to talk about this, and we need to be able to do stuff about this. And it isn't price control to actually attack the people who are in fact controlling prices.
It's that Excel mindset. It's that Excel brain cult of efficiency. I mean, funny you say that. I got attacked by Obama's former econ person, Jason Furman, for my Walmart chapter. I tweeted it out because I was just saying, like, why are we getting so much welfare to Walmart? The largest employer in America, private employer. And here's the funny thing about Jason. Jason wrote a thing that we should do more subsidies for Walmart. And it's like, why are we giving all these subsidies to America's richest family? Here's the thing. He doesn't tell people, by the way, his family made their fortune in real estate doing deals with Walmart, which drives me nuts. But, somehow that's off the table in elite America. But the second time, too, it's also like he's the people squawking, oh, there's no price gouging going on. It's like I tweeted out this USDA chart on milk prices. They take the major metropolitans in America and they go around different grocery stores and average out milk costs. People in Chicago area spend $1 more on a gallon of milk than the rest of America. And you're like, because there's just one provider of milk. Like that is the textbook definition of gouging. Like you can do your little theories in Excel, or I can just be like, hey, like this is reality. This is the real world. And by the way, this makes no sense. You're next to Wisconsin, one of the biggest dairy states in America. How do you not have a competitive milk market?
Right.
It's just you're going to have those people. You have to accept it. You're going to have hacks for industry, people that are squawking and maintaining the system because certain people benefit from the status quo. You just need to rely on your convictions and understand most people are with you. Most Americans know they're being gouged at the store. That's why this stuff is hitting right now. That's why both people running for president are talking about it is people know that there's no logic in Lay's charging $6 for a bag of chips.
Yeah. And the closer you look, the crazier it gets.
Yes. And it's just, it's the devil's in the details. So really lean into that. Like that's what I like to focus in on is that's once I tell people Smucker's has a 70% market share in peanut butter, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's just that's what really opens people's eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Austin, I think I think we could probably talk for hours.
I know
But
my voice is kind of hoarse.
this has been a great conversation. I think covered kind of all the ground I wanted to cover. From kind of what the problem has been to how it got this way to where we go from here, and capturing, I think, a lot of in the end, trying to bring a spirit of rebuilding and fighting a good fight and um, serving a vision that doesn't have to be this way, and that can be something that is more life affirming and hopeful, and that's something we can do.
Yeah, and I appreciate your focus on the solutions. I mean, that is something I'm just kind of over complaining.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think most people are.
absolutely. Man, that's true. Let's make it different. It's important, and that's why your book does such a good job. It's important to say where we are and how we've gotten there. Like I mean, these facts need to be understood. But in the end, it's like, what do you do with those facts? And you can just say sort of, woe is me and get bitter, or you can like not accept it.
And that to me is like, I'm the child of a small business owner. Is you got to do something. You can't complain.
Mm-hmm.
I could pop off on Twitter, but like I decided to spend some of my time writing this book. It's just, this is what I want to do. And then my goal in my career now is how do I build on this? Like the book to me is just step one.
Yeah.
How can I work now to make that better system? Is now I get it. I understand the Farm Bill, and it took me forever to understand the Farm Bill. But now you realize it's designed for Wall Street and no one else.
It's another brilliant little. I like how you call it the Wall Street Farm Bill, and how read his book. We're not going to be able to trace his whole book. Read the book, but just tracing the history of the Farm Bill for when it was started as one thing, and then was turned through the help of people such as the Cargill family, was turned into something completely different, which you call the Wall Street Farm Bill.
And that is, I mean, that chapter right there was 2 years of work. I mean, I just had to read so many articles on Farm Bill and like just realizing what's going on here. I mean, it's people make, and this is my dad showing me, people purposely make things complex to profit off it. People profit off complexity.
Mm-hmm.
The more, because you don't understand. So my goal was like, distill. It's like a slow cooker. You really just got to distill. You got to simmer in these ideas, and like, talking to other people really helps you communicate this stuff. Like, here's what's really going on, and people appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and I'm very excited to stay in touch and be a part of what we're both trying to build. So it'll be good to keep track of each other and keep working on it.
We are the official presidents of the Greg Gunthorpe Fan Society.
Yes, I'm with that for sure.
Or drafting him for Secretary of Agriculture on that note. But yeah, thanks again. I really appreciate the time you took here.
Thank you.